Cheers and salutations. Welcome one and all to Americans Learn. My name is Kit. Please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe and hit that ring bell notification. That way all of you are made aware we upload new content upon our YouTube channel. And today, we are joined with Eastory. And Eastory is going to be about Germany's plans to win World War One. How is it going to do it? That's right. We've gone through the Western Front and the Eastern Front of the Second World War, but many of you, hold on, stutter there for a second. Many of you lovely, beautiful, hip, cool cats have been asking us to check out more of Eastory's work, and for that, we shall obey and follow your demands. This is about Germany's plan to win the First World War. So, obviously, World War One, a complicated conflict between the Central Powers and the Allied Powers that would eventually lay down the foundations of the sequel that everyone would dread, World War II. So let's go ahead and find out what Germania's plans were and how it was going to supposedly win the First World War. An alternate history. Now, that would be an interesting alternate history, because usually they always have like the Second World War and, oh, what would happen if Germany won World War II? I'm always curious, though, if anyone ever made an alternate history where maybe Germany won World War One, or either that, made out okay and wasn't completely destroyed as it was in our timeline, in our universe. So more on that, perhaps. So grab yourself a tasty snack and a tasty beverage, and let's enjoy this in a 3, a 2, a 1.
Imperial Germany, country famous for military fashion and war plans. In fact, in this video we are going to see what were the German plans to win World War I and how they changed. In early 20th century, the alliance of Germany and Austria was opposed by the alliance of Russia and France. The strength of the alliances was quite equal, so an inconclusive and bloody war was to be expected. The German army wanted none of it and looked at its potential enemies for weaknesses. It was believed that one of the weaknesses of the Entente nations was that due to its size and poor infrastructure, it would take Russia several weeks more than Germany to get its entire army to the front. Until that time, Germany had to contend only with France and had an upper hand. The Germans wanted to use the first weeks of the war to inflict a blow from which their enemies would not be able to recover.
I'm digging the animation. It's not as detailed as what we saw in the previous videos, but I can enjoy the humor. It has a little bit of a charm to it, and you know what? It can keep the viewer engaged. That's what I like.
The question was where to do it. They could attempt to destroy the Russian forces stationed on the border, but due to the long distances of the Eastern Front, the damage would have been limited. The distances in the west were much shorter, and it was possible to inflict more damage to the French army. For this, the Germans had to draw the French into a decisive battle. The best way to make the French to fully commit their troops was to invade France. But the French had prepared just for this occasion and had built a line of fortifications on the Franco-German border. So the Germans decided to bypass the line.
Knowing that the French would use the same tactic in the First and in the Second World War should tell you, like, hey, look, madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Line by moving through Belgium, then defeat the French army in a decisive battle, forcing France to make peace. Then they would move the bulk of their forces east and use the newly gained superiority to defeat Russia. The pieces were all set, and all that was needed was someone to light the fuse. On the 28th of June 1914, Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated and declared.
Well, I shouldn't laugh at that, but that imagery was hilarious.
Declarations of war followed. Now, Germany was able to implement its plan and moved into Belgium. They managed to advance into France, but their plan as a whole proved to be too optimistic, and they failed to trap and destroy the French army, and fighting resulted in a stalemate. Also, Britain joined the Entente and enacted a maritime blockade on Germany. Trench warfare set in on the Western Front, making attacking difficult. It meant that it would be more complicated for Germany to defeat France, but at the same time made it unlikely that Britain and France could invade Germany. Meanwhile, in the east, the absence of the German army had made itself felt. They managed to keep control over East Prussia, but Russian army had made inroads into Austria-Hungary, threatening to knock it out of the war and tied up many Central Powers units. In 1915, the Germans decided to go over on defensive in the west and stabilize the situation in the east to free up the troops. The Russian army had prepared for a short war, and its weak weapons industry could not yet adequately supply its troops. They were
Should also be pointed to that during this time there was political instability. The people of Russia or the Russian Empire were, they weren't too keen on the Tsar. They weren't too keen on his regime. And what eventually led was a political revolution, a Bolshevik revolution. Now, I do want to point out, I found this out, and I actually found his original dog tag, but my great grandfather served in the First World War. But he was part of the American Siberian expedition into Russia. And so I have in my possession his old World War I dog tag. So that is a fantastic find. My grandfather, his son, kept it, and I was able to find it, and it's in my possession. So, yeah, crazy small world we live in, folks.
unable to resist the Central Powers and took a defensive stance by shortening the length of the front twofold. In this time, Bulgaria was convinced to join the Central Powers, which allowed them to defeat Serbia. This was, however, offset by the entry of Italy into the war. The Eastern Front was now secured, although Russia still remained in the war. In the early 1916, the situation of the Central Powers had been stabilized, but the British blockade was slowly sapping their strength, and in order not to lose the war, they had to inflict a decisive defeat on the Entente. In the east, it would be difficult for them to reach the areas vital for Russian war effort due to vast distances and poor infrastructure.
The only people who ever conquered Russia successfully, say it with me, folks, Genghis Khan and his fantastic friends. Nobody else.
Even if the Germans would be able to make substantial advances, it was hard to make Russia surrender. Operations in the east would be more difficult than in the previous year, as the Russian army had shortened its defensive lines and was beginning to overcome the supply shortages. Although the Central Powers could have been successful in Russia, they would probably find themselves committing a lot of their troops without removing Russia from the war. In the west, there was trench warfare, and German attacks needed to expend a lot of men and material resources to break through the Entente defenses. In case of German advance, the French and the British could pull back, inflicting vast casualties and winning slowly by attrition. Or they could counterattack, thus making the losses more equal, but denying the Germans any territory. Neither of the options could lead to a decisive German victory. Instead, the plan was to make the Entente attack the Germans and expend their manpower on strong defenses. After they had sustained enough losses, the Germans would have the superiority needed to go on an offensive and win the war. It was not an easy task to make the Entente adopt such a suicidal strategy, so a complicated and cunning plan was devised. The Germans would attack the fortress of Verdun, where they could create a great tactical advantage for themselves, but which was symbolically vital for the French. The plan relied on three assumptions. After the initial German successes, the French will not
Let this be a lesson. Never assume. When you assume, you make an. Say it with me. I gotta be careful. Don't upset any guidelines, but you never assume. You never assume.
withdraw from Verdun, but will at any cost attempt counterattacks to regain the land around it. The British and the French shall launch an attack on the German defenses in other sectors to ease the German pressure on Verdun. During these operations, the French and the British would suffer much more casualties than the Germans. The first two assumptions were correct. The French held on to Verdun, and the Entente attacked at Somme to help with the defense. But the third assumption was not. During these operations, the Entente had suffered the loss of 1 million men, but the German casualties were only slightly smaller. The Germans had made another miscalculation.
God.
They had assumed
Collectively, that's almost close to 2 million people.
that in 1916 the Eastern Front would be quiet. But the entry of Italy to the war in the previous year had divided the Austro-Hungarian forces, and the measures to improve the armament of the Russian army began to kick in. The Russians carried out a successful offensive, pushing the Austro-Hungarian forces back. Soon the situation deteriorated even further, as the success of Russian attacks convinced Romania to join the war against the Central Powers, and now German reserves had to be dispatched to save the Eastern Front from collapse. The Central Powers had failed to inflict a decisive defeat on their enemies and were mostly on the defensive again, with the British blockade bringing their defeat nearer by the day. It was time to think outside the box and adopt creative and risky strategies, or war was lost. The risks associated with these strategies were huge. Germany now attempted to knock Russia and Britain out of the war. A revolution had taken place in Russia, but the new government decided to carry on with the war. German plan was to support the influence of the left-wing political parties in Russia, hoping that they would create internal strife, causing Russia to make peace. They allowed Lenin to travel back to Russia from Switzerland and allegedly gave large subsidies to his Bolshevik party. This strategy was risky, as the success of socialists in Russia could very well cause instability or even revolution in Germany itself. The other plan was to starve Britain into surrendering by using the German submarine fleet to sink the British shipping. For this strategy to be effective, the Germans had to sink all the ships carrying cargoes to Britain, which included the ships from neutral countries. This carried the risk of war with these nations. Unrestricted submarine warfare had been adopted earlier, but later discontinued in the fear that America would declare war on Germany. Now the situation was deemed to be desperate enough to risk it, and unrestricted submarine warfare was reintroduced. At the same time, Germany attempted to free up troops by reducing the length of the Western Front and substituting men with weapons. Despite these efforts, during 1917 they couldn't spare troops for more than maintaining the current state, which would ultimately result in defeat. Entente offensives in the west were repelled and sizable forces were dispatched to Romania in order to seize its resources. Italian army was pushed back in order to keep Austria-Hungary in the war. It was all on the out-of-the-box measures by this time. The strategy directed against Britain failed totally, as the adoption of convoy system reduced the efficiency of the German submarines, and the United States did enter the war against Germany.
Hey, look, this is great right here. Perfect representation of America. With a gun. Hey, late to the party? What's going on?
Russia, however, was another case. Russian army was weakened by the revolution, which allowed the Central Powers to advance and improve their positions. The Bolsheviks managed to increase their influence in Russia and deposed the government. They had to demobilize most of the army, but refused to make peace with Germany and attempted to incite revolution. The Germans managed to keep the situation under control. In order to resolve the situation in the east, the Germans went on an offensive. The Russian army had lost its fighting capabilities, and the German advance took over large parts of the former Russian Empire, forcing the Bolsheviks to agree to their terms.
I never knew this. This is on. I've never heard about the German expanse into Russia at this extent. If there's any videos or short documentary videos that we should check out that talk about Germany and how it was able to pull this off, because hey, that's why we call this channel Americans Learn. I never knew that. That is fantastic.
By this time, the resource stocks had become critical, and it seemed that unless the situation improved, defeat was only a question of time. Despite that, a window of opportunity had been created. The freed-up troops from the east gave the Germans the numbers needed to have a chance to launch an offensive in the west. By now, both the Entente and the Germans had developed better ways to break through the enemy's trenches, and it was possible to undertake a decisive offensive. However, there was a catch. The Germans needed to defeat the Entente before the newly arriving American troops would make the odds overwhelming. They launched an all-out offensive. The attacks took large amounts of territory, but caused many casualties to the Germans. In the end, the line held, and the Germans were unable to deliver a decisive blow. It became clear that Germany was unable to win, and the Entente armies launched a counter-offensive. The Germans attempted to hold on to captured lands in order to secure a better peace settlement, but their army was spent and began to fall back towards the German border. As all was lost, Germany finally agreed to surrender. So, was Germany doomed from the start? Can you think of strategies which could have ended the war in a German victory? Share these ideas in the comments. The German war effort might have been strangled by the blockade, but not this channel. And I have my Patreons to thank for it. If you'd like to join this club of blockade runners, you can do that through Patreon. Speaking of blockades, here you can watch how Germany attempted to blockade Britain in the next war. Or if you like the style of the videos, you can check out one of my fully animated map videos here.
All right, so first of all, for a 10-minute, 16-second video, it went into extreme detail about really what Germany or the German Empire could have done and what its plans were to maybe have a much more favorable peace treaty or victory in its favor. I think it's easy for all of us to be armchair generals and say, well, they should have done this, they should have done that. The smart move was to at least get one of the opponents out, and that would have been Russia because of the political instability. Of course, Lenin, being who he was, wasn't just going to sit idly by and let the Kaiser and his regime tell him what to do. But if I did have any kind of power or sway, or if I could put any kind of input, this is my opinion, and all of you, hey, add in your own inputs as well. Obviously, the submarines going after neutral ships was a bad idea. Perhaps maybe sending out diplomatic envoys to the neutral powers in order to say, like, hey, look, this war's gone on long enough. The Eastern Front is over, and we have all our troops pushing to the Western Front, and we're going to keep on pushing back. But maybe, I don't know, put down the pressure to the neutral nations, keep them out, and say, like, hey, look, we want to have diplomatic peace talks. Why don't you guys come in as neutral parties? Yes, I know that's a bit of a long shot because America was giving resources and aid to Great Britain and France. But this is like fun speculation. I don't know what else they could have done because at that point, even as we get into 1917, 1918, I mean, both sides are thoroughly spent. And even if America never got involved, that battle line wasn't going away anytime soon. Like, both the Allied powers and the Central powers were not going to give up a single inch of land. So it could have gone on longer if America never got involved. I don't see how either side would have sat at the table anyways, because let's face it, you can't change history. You could speculate, and that's what alternate history is. You have some brave writer out there who gives out their perspective and point of view. But all in all, returning back to the video, this was absolutely entertaining. Love the imagery. Really like the creativity of Eastory. And if there's more content you guys want us to check out from Eastory, please type in the comment section below. Your feedback is fundamentally important, so let us know what's up as soon as you can. And hey, question to you: if you had the power to maybe add in your own input, how would you have changed Germany's plans to win the First World War? What would you have done differently? What have been your tactics and stratagems? Share them with the people. And perhaps maybe, I don't know, one of you will be creative enough to write an alternate history book. No, don't do one of World War II, okay? It's been played out. What would happen if the Axis powers won World War II? Spoiler alert, the world would suck. There, okay? Simple as that. That's lazy. I want you to be creative. What would you do differently if you were in the First World War and Germany was able to have some kind of better plan or better victory or better end result? What would you do, you hip cool cats? Until then, take good care of yourselves. Please support Eastory. The original link is in the description box below. Take care. I am up out of here.